This is Jamie Dyer welcoming you to another edition of the Quo-Cast. And I'm joined by, it's a bit of deja vu to be honest, by Gary from the tribute band Quo'd, who you may remember as the first ever guest that we had on the podcast 4 years ago. We're here today to talk about Status Quo's 1973 chart-topping album, Hello. Gary, what are your thoughts on the album Hello?
It's seminal. It's, of all the Quo albums, I would say that, for me, it's the one that started my Quo journey. And in fact, what I should have dug it out. I've got a pile of vinyl there. It's well battered and bruised. It's the first album I picked up as a kid. I put the record on the turntable, and the noise of Parfitt's guitar came out playing the intro to Caroline, and I was hooked. Just amazing. It's such a it's got everything about it, and I think it. From my point of view, it's one of those albums that they're much more sure-footed than they were in Pole Driver. I think there is no filler in that album. And I kind of, it feels a bit blasphemous to say it, and I probably get shouted at, but yeah, Pile Driver's got a couple of quiet ones that don't really do it for me. You don't get that with Hello. It's a wonderful work of art. It really is. It's brilliant.
Well, you said there's no quiet ones, and It's Better Now is about as quiet as you get, I think.
Yeah, but we've done an It's Better Now, and I remember going into it thinking, yeah, it's gonna be quiet. And it's not, because it goes, damn! It's just massive. It's absolutely massive. So yeah, okay, it's slightly less pacey, and it's not got that sort of the boogie shuffle chug that goes along, or the sort of full throttle of Blue Eyed Lady or something like that. But it's in its own right, it's a pretty hefty piece of music, I think.
Yeah, I'm not sure I quite understood it. One, until I heard it on acoustic, and two, until I heard you guys play it at the convention. And it did sound pretty good, because we should give a little bit of context. You and your band have played this entire album from front to back. What did you learn from doing that?
What a pearler of a question, that one. That's yet again, it's one of those things where you start picking it apart, and you discover that actually Quo is much more multi-dimensional than most people give them credit for. And I'm talking about non-fans, but I think for fans alike, you can go from a song like "And It's Better Now" into 4,500 times. There's such a dramatic contrast. There's light and shade in all of it. You've got Roll Over Lay Down, for example, gets really, really quiet, and it comes back in with a wallop, and it really does hit you. There's some really great songwriting on it. I mean, I love the lyrical content of Claudie. That's wonderful. It's got my all-time favourite single on there, Caroline. So multi-dimensional. It kind of did. I think it set the tone for Quo for the remainder of that sort of golden era, I think. And I think most people probably look at that, maybe Quo and perhaps On the Level Blue for You, as being, that's the body of work. But I think that one's got diversity in it. And I guess if ever you get to ask Francis, I think that's his favourite album as well, and I think it's for similar reasons. Diversity, there's the scale of everything that they can do. They can be a hard rock band in 4,500 times. They can be great songwriters in Claudie. They can be experimental and sort of getting into more proggy kind of territory. And It's Better Now. They're a barroom balling band on Blue Eyed Lady. There's a little bit of quasi-religion in Reason for Living. It's just wonderful. It's just chef's kiss. Superb.
I mean, the solos on this album, from Roll Over Lay Down to the aforementioned Reason for Living, even Blue Eyed Lady, the solos on this album, he seems to really find his voice in this one.
Absolutely. I mean, actually, in Reason for Living is probably my favourite of Francis's solos. Really, it's short and sweet. It's got, people wax on about Clapton and all that. He's got Rossi in that period had he had that kind of phrasing. I think there's a bit of Peter Green about him. He was thinking melodically about his playing. Yeah, he's not a sort of shredding player like a Richie Blackmore or someone like that. Of a similar time, but he was taking melodic ideas. He clearly worked a little bit on his tone for that album. It's a little more nuanced than it was in, say, the Mark Kellys or the Dog or Two Head days. It wasn't as full throated as it ended up being in the Blue for You era. So it was just and you kind of felt that his playing had grown to a point where, like you say, I think he'd kind of matured a little bit and started to find a voice as a lead guitarist in a way that you probably hadn't seen up until that point, I think.
When you compare it to something like Lucky Lady, where the solo is kind of unsure, it sounds like somebody literally just learnt it and has been asked to play it on record. So the confidence there. I was listening to tracks from it earlier today, and it struck me, and certainly from you talking there, that this is the first album, seemingly, where they find the country spirit, because before that, it was very bluesy, very sort of rock and rolly. And with tracks like Claudie, you've got that country element coming in, and some of the scales and phrases that they're using are more on that side of it.
Yeah. I mean, there's not, okay. His solo is a sort of minor pentatonic. Sorry for non-guitarists, but it's those five notes. Bum 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 bum. They're the ones that you get in the blues scale. So he does take that in the solo, but actually the actual riff, and when you hear it on, I think he did it on acrostic, didn't he? So it really worked well in that kind of Zydeco sort of feel, where they have accordions and fiddles and all that kind of stuff going on. So it just worked, and it's actually, I found that one quite challenging to play positionally. Where do you go with that? And if there's guitarists listening, they'll know. You can start it, on the open D. You can start it up around the 5th fret. There's different places you can play it. They all present a challenge because of the way. I think Francis is not necessarily a guitarist. He gets a melody in his head and just finds a way to make it happen. You kind of almost have to unlearn to play the guitar to be able to do it in the same way that Francis would do. And I guess that's one of the things that I learned when we were preparing to play that live. I've played it millions of times as a kid, just jamming along with the record, but it's a bit different when you take it to the conventional. I think we did it also somewhere. Diamond Mansfield, I think we did that. We did certainly that track. You've got to get it right, and it can be a challenge.
Definitely so, and I would imagine there's no challenge quite like 4,500 times, which on this album has got. And you're laughing, so I'm assuming I'm correct in that. But on this album, it's in its proto stage. I think it takes another couple of years for it to develop into the behemoth that it becomes, that 22 minutes worth.
So here's the thing, right? I would love to, if ever I get a chance to go along to one of Francis's, meet and greets and have a chat, I want to know what happens as that fades out. And I don't know if you've ever sat there and, as it fades, you just, get the volume up to 11, 12, as much as you can get it, because they get on that, and actually, they do go. They start doing that transition to "Gotta Go Home." So they played it, and somewhere around is a tape. I don't know what happened to the tape. Run out. They obviously ran out of space on the vinyl to fit it in. I mean, they could only fit what was it, 15, 16 minutes on a side of 12. I don't know. There was some technical limitations as to how long that could go on for. I'd love to know what's in the can on that. I mean, that for me, you know, you stuck opening a little window, just getting a little peep of what was going on in their mind at the time. And you can imagine if that went on, that was going to be absolutely stonking.
And we got a little bit of a feel on that when John Eden did the Rockin' All Over the World remix, and suddenly we heard the rest of Rockers Rolling.
Yeah. I think Hold You Back went on for a bit longer, didn't it? There was quite a few of them where, okay, it did descend into chaos at the end, and I think other bands have done it as well. I mean, one of my other, all-time favourites is Woman from Tokyo, Deep Purple, and some additional mixes of that turned up where they were just rocking at the end of it, but then it just fell apart. I think somebody just started mucking around, and that was that. So maybe that's all that happens at the end of that. I don't know. I'd love to know the story of how that come about. I mean, I don't know if they'd performed it many times in the early days. Certainly the bootlegs I've seen from that period don't feature 4,500 times. And so where would they have got the idea that they're going to play, Gotta Go Home? Because, that was what, 2 or 3 albums prior to that? Well, they were still on the Pie label, I think, at that time, weren't they? So
yeah,
it must be 1977. So it was a couple of years old. And they were probably doing it live then. But, at what point did they then go, yeah, we got a right thing on our hands here. We're going to do that. I'd love to know the story behind that.
I mean, maybe the connection is as simple as, that other long song we used to do.
Yeah.
Because Gotta Go Home on some performances went on for like 25 minutes.
Yeah.
But not quite as much variation as 4,500 times. It's usually like just one chord being chugged for like 10 minutes.
Yeah. I mean, I remember the first time I heard the live album. So, and I think I've probably told you the story before that, my dad used to play Sunday league football. He would drop me off at my nan's. He'd pick my uncle up who was living there at the time. My uncle had all these wonderful albums from the 70s, some of which we can't talk about anymore, and they're long gone. But there was this, huge body of Quo albums there. And when I got a bit older, he gave them all to me. He said, right, you got to listen to them in sequence. Didn't have them all, had most of them. He said, you must listen to live at the end. So I did it. I sat there all day with it cranked up. 4,500 times, this is going to be good on the live album. And I'm looking at the vinyl. It's most of an entire side of that album. I can't remember what went before it, but oh my goodness, and I just kept going back over it. And at one point, probably I was doing about 14 or 15, that blue Strat, that was my main guitar at the time, and I had it down note for note. That blue Strat knows that performance. Is I can't remember it anymore. That's one of the problems. I was remembering all the licks as well, and you get sort of tied up in the excitement of it all, and it does get a little bit it gets a little bit frantic. You kind of end up making a bit of it up yourself, really. But it's just superb, Again, from the Hello album, if people think about Quo live, most people are going to be talking about 4,500 times, and they're talking about the Hello album. Wonderful.
Yeah, definitely. Softer Ride was actually recorded like a year or so before, wasn't it? Because it was the B-side of Paper Plane.
It was, yeah.
And actually, when you listen to it, yes, it fits into Hello, but it could probably have fit into Pile Driver too, because it is a little bit more stripped back than maybe some of the stuff.
Yeah, you're right. And I wonder, how much of Hello was kind of in progress when they were recording Pile Driver. And I don't know how many months there are between the two albums. What was Pile Driver? Early 72, and Hello was what? January something 73. So, by the time they've recorded it, written it, you're probably looking at 6 months. So, from a sequencing perspective, I'd imagine Softer Ride was one of the later things they wrote in the Pile Driver sessions. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it absolutely fits into Hello. Again, another absolutely fantastic solo from Francis. That little one that just builds at the end. By that time, I'm like, oh, here we go. It's one I absolutely love playing. And it's got an odd ending. You know, that's another thing about Quo, odd endings, you know. Da 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 dum da.
Yeah, it sort of ends on a minor or something, doesn't it? It's quite an unusual way, because normally you're used to like, is there a better way type stuff, you know, whereas the big finish, whereas this just kind of goes off on one note.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, where did that come from? The other thing, this is probably more of a pile driver thing, is some of their intros as well. Now, there's a, you know, we've attempted it and we've done it live twice, and we don't normally put ourselves up for the sheer horror that can be getting the intro to Blue Eyed Lady wrong. You know, you've got da 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 da, and there's a 2-part harmony, there's a 3-part harmony, including the bass guitar. That's odd. There's only one other band I can think of that were renowned for doing that at that time. That's Wishbone Ash. You know, and it's another one of my favourite bands. Really, is all that kind of stuff that Andy Powell, Ted Turner, and Martin, thinking me Bob, bass player guy, were doing. So I wonder if there was a bit of an influence on them around that. And I think that's something that over time got lost with Quo. You know, there's a lot of wonderful intros. You know, it carries on throughout the Quo album as well. You know, the intro to Backwater and Just Take Me is it's another absolute classic. And I think there's a little bit of Alan Lancaster about that. I've got a feeling that's something to do with him, because they tend to be bass led.
Yeah, I think so. I loved the fact that they performed that Blue Eyed Lady on the Frantic Four tours, and you did wonder, why have you never done this before, and why wasn't it a single?
Exactly. I remember the days of the. I don't know if you remember the old Quo forum. You know, when it was, I think it was the Status Quo message board, and it used to descend into chaos every so often. Frantic Four, throwing things at each other and all rowing about their favourite band. Crazy. But I think Rhino used to write something, and he used to go, you know, moaning on about fans, there was weird Blue Eyed Lady, or I think his words were bag of shite. But yeah, they did it, and they gave the punters what they want, and it is a great song. You know, it's simple lyrics. I don't know if it's an Alan Lancaster song. It might be a Lancaster song, I think. It's just a pickup line, isn't it? You know, I went to a party, I saw a girl there. Who are you with? You know, it's just good. It's a beer and girls song. You know, I love that stuff.
I mean, if you start looking down the titles, they all start looking like beer and girls songs. Don't they? Like Claudie, Caroline.
But that one's less nuanced. That one's much more, you know, it's laddish. You know, it's not particularly nuanced in the way that Claudie is. You know, I mean, Claudie's a love song. I used to write songs for you, and can I write them again? And all that. Yeah, okay. This one's, hey, babe, you want to dance? You know, an half an hour.
Aren't you glad, though, that Rick Parfitt had his say on Caroline? Because apparently that's the story of how that intro came about. Yeah. They were sort of doing it in this slow bluesy thing. Yeah. And then he went, why don't we just do this? Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, you know, and it's like, thank goodness you did that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I remember the first time I heard the demos, and I'm obviously really excited to hear it, you know. Da, 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 da. Oh, really? And then there was one that was more like that don't work either. And then the story is that, you know, Rick just went and picked up his SG and just hammered that intro out. But if you listen to that, it's a bit, again, it's more nuanced than just literally blah 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 blah, blah, because he's got a counter rhythm going on. He's got obviously the da 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 da, but he's also got chaka 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 chaka. So, and that's really, really complicated to do. And it's one of those things that, you know, when we first started doing Quo'd, I was doing the rhythm stuff, and you know, Mick, who we formed the band with, was doing the lead stuff, even though I had the green telly and he had the white one. But anyway, and I remember playing, yeah, I can do that. But I never really played it. I'll tell you what, I was knackered after, like, you know, a couple of runs through on that. And it's actually I've got a bit of an injury at the moment, but it's in this hand. It's what's going on there. is so precise and so powerful and so rhythmic. And I think someone told him, "Hey Rick, that's amazing. That's really rhythmic." I think there's a story somewhere, and I don't know where, I can't remember where I've read it. And he said that was the first ever compliment he got for about, for his guitar playing. I think that perhaps buoyed him really into saying, "Well, I'm the engine room. That's what I do. I create that." That incessant drive in the rhythm section, which when you put it against Francis's slightly more, it's a bit looser, so you've got Rick's very, very tight against Francis's slightly lopsided kind of groove. And those two things together, when they mesh together, make that Status Quo sound. I think it was Pip Williams said about this. He'd obviously spent a long time studying how they did it and what they need to do to make that happen, and I think he kind of perfected the art. So he's probably one of the only people on the planet that could probably turn up in a studio and actually make a Status Quo like sound, without Francis or Rick there. It's just the way those two players intertwined, just complementary styles, I think.
And it's perfectly shown on Caroline, and probably in later years helped to cement them as almost like a double act, because obviously every time you see them on TV and they're playing Caroline, you've got Rick coming in followed by Francis, and that's kind of what you're focusing on for the whole time.
And I think the other thing about it, and I think it was Francis somewhere, commented, he said, "Well, Status Quo are one of the only bands that have got two rhythm guitarists," because Francis apparently never wanted to be a lead player. I think he said this loads of times. He never wanted to practice, never particularly wanted to have to take solos and all the rest of it. He was a songwriter and a singer, really. So what you ended up with is two guys playing that shuffle pattern in they've taken different approaches to it. AC/DC kind of do it a little bit, or did do it a little bit with Malcolm and Angus, but you kind of got less of a feel from Angus in the AC/DC lineup than you did from Malcolm. And it's, you often get these silly things, greatest rhythm guitarist ever, and everyone from America goes Malcolm Young, and then all of a sudden there'll be a pile-on from Quo fans, Rick Parfitt, what about Rossi? He's a great rhythm player as well. It doesn't work if you only have a Rick, and it doesn't work if you only have a Francis. And in one of my covers bands, we do Rocking All Over the World, and I'm the only guitarist in the band, and I'm like, yeah, okay, we'll do Rocking All Over the World, but I'm kind of missing Rick's ding, 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 ding. I can't do that and sing and do the it's got to go on, the sort of the Francis part. So it's the way those two things blend, and I think with Hello, coming back to the purpose of this, you do hear a lot of it. Roll Over, Lay Down. If you listen to it carefully, you can hear Rick in one side, and you've actually got Rossi that's doing something like that, but he's much less. And I don't use the word mechanical in a critical way to Rick. He's a machine. That is the engine room. That's an engine going around. It's firing on all four cylinders, absolutely perfect in time. Rossi's kind of colouring that in, and he's. I think Rossi makes the shoulders go, and Rick makes the head go. So you get that sort of Status Quo kind of groove to it. And I don't think they ever sat there and worked it out. I think that's just how it was.
Well, apparently during the recording of these albums in the early days, they'd sit in a circle, or as Rick would call it, the magic circle. Because they just feed off it. And with something like Roll Over, Lay Down, you can feel that. It's definitely a feeling of that in the music. I try not to look into the lyrics too much. As a kid, looking over the lyrics for Roll Over, Lay Down, thinking, what's he talking about?
I'm not even sure what the lyrics are. I think I fudged them, to be honest. Taking the dream from the original tone, I'm toe shoot the most up. Not really sure what that's about. I'm just in the moment when I'm singing it, really. So
something about taking something from the table. That's about all I
drink from
remember.
The fridge, from the table. Reckon I'll lay me straight down on the floor. I get that one, but there's something to do with toast. I don't know where the toast bit comes in. Toast your snap for. So yeah.
It's not quite as nonsensical as In My Chair, though.
No, definitely not. They may have had a different brand of herbal cigarette at that point. I don't know. But the thing I love about that, I mean, that for me, that song's all about that quiet bit in the middle, and there's this storm that brews, isn't there? It's like watching black clouds rolling. There's going to be a thunderstorm in a minute, and the temperature's changed, and then it builds up. You got Coghlan's. You think, how much harder is that going to get? Oh, it's going to get a lot harder. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, it's wonderful. Absolutely love it. And then they're not done because there's a long solo. Oh, even better, And another one with an odd ending as well. He ends on that little and he strikes a chord, this little triad chord that you normally play down the bottom, plays it up the top, and he just got lucky because the guitar went at the end and fed back, and it was just perfect. It was Hendrixian, right? Foxy Lady, the intro to that he got that note to happen. That note happened for Francis, they wouldn't have sat and worked that out. It just happened because of the way they recorded it. They recorded it amps on the floor. It was loud. It was live. Guitars were reacting with speakers. Everything was bouncing. All the sounds all smashing into one another. It's just, I don't know why things don't get recorded like that now. We spend all this effort on, digital trickery and all that kind of stuff. Oh, it sounds like a Marshall. Well, it don't really, because it's not. We haven't got air slamming out of a speaker and bashing into a microphone and an engineer trying to turn it down. No, we're rocking. That's the sound of rock and roll is the volume, and I think that really comes across in the recording. And I think it's one of those things that recording technology was still relatively primitive then. They hadn't moved on that much from the 60s. Production techniques were, and I think you can hear it in a lot of the Quo stuff. I don't know if the guys that mastered it were a bit, got a bit Mutt and Jeff, because it's quite trebly, so it's almost like they pushed a bit of trebly so they can hear it, and it just wouldn't sound like that today. But I think it stood the test of time, because when you go back and listen to it, it still sounds to me as fresh as it ever did, in a way that certain other albums don't, I think.
Yeah, I think so, because later on, you're right, they did go a little bit cleaner with things like Rockin' All Over the World, trying to get that separation in. It's sort of stereo separation, whereas this feels like one big feed. I mean, it's not quite, one mic in the room. It's still manufactured in a way because it's several microphones, but it's something a bit more raw. I mean, obviously, no overdubs or anything like that. It's just, straightforward. Yeah.
And then you have to sort of, ask yourself, well, why? Because in those days, we're talking in the 70s, people didn't really have, 5.1, well, they didn't have 5.1 Dolby Surround and all that kind of stuff. People had still fairly primitive equipment. If you're listening to it in the car, it was medium wave out of a 3-watt, radio, a silly little elliptical speaker, cranked up, was all distorted, and, transistor radios, all that kind of stuff. That's how people heard and consumed music in those days. You do have to wonder, was the industry a little bit sort of too early in trying to get that quality in? Because you can listen to it now and go, oh yeah, there's things I haven't heard in there. But the old criticism was that Quo's sound sort of went a little bit softer after Pip Williams come in, and it kind of got rid of some of those more raucous recording techniques that we saw from Pole Driver through to, well, I guess what, Blue for You, I suppose. Yeah.
Blue for You. Mm-hmm.
So that's maybe why people see it as the golden period, because the material certainly isn't any weaker on that album. I know we're getting off the point of Hello here, but I think if you were to perform some of those songs from Rockin' and record them in the way that you did with Hello, Can't Give You More, I think, would probably work in a way like that. Yeah, it's got the whoa 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 bit in it, but it would sound like Blue Eyed Lady if they'd performed it and recorded it in the same way, I think.
Yeah, I think that's usually the thing, though, because they say about quoing things up, something's in a Quo style. And usually I think, I mean, you can answer this because you're in a tribute band. I'm not. I'm just a guy, in his front room who bashes away some Rick Parfitt chords now and again. Whenever you're searching for that Quo sound, you're probably always searching for somewhere around the Hello Pile Driver period.
Yes, I think you're right. But again, I think it's one of the things that's open to interpretation. If you was to ask, Woody from our band, he's very much all about the modern Quo, and some of the guys I met at convention, some of the younger lads, they probably lean towards albums like Thirsty Work. And I think if you say to them, well, go and carve a song up, and they go, yeah, how would they have done it on In Search of the Fourth Chord, for example? And that's interesting. But generally, I think I would probably start to play it like Blue Eyed Lady, really. That's how I would do it. Because that's the Quo I know and love. And for me, that's Quo in its purest form, I think.
And that's what we found. That's what I found at the convention, was speaking to so many different people, and they've all got different, ideas as to how this thing is done. And you're right, there is a younger contingent that are influenced by, Heavy Traffic, In Search of the Fourth Chord. Yeah. I mean, let's mention that Fourth Chord was produced by Pip Williams.
Yeah.
And I remember getting that album home and putting it on my hi-fi and thinking, this kind of sounds retro in the way that it was, because it was kind of getting back to previous.
Yeah, because we'd lived through, albums like Army and Ain't Complaining and oh God, Perfect Remedy.
Perfect Remedy.
We love that. We talked about this before, didn't we? It's got some gems in it. I mean, Ain't Complaining is fabulous, but it's not. I don't think if you're going to Quo a song up, you would start going, yeah, let's make it sound like another Shipwreck. You wouldn't be going there, would you? That's not really. Well, cream of the crop. Let's get it to sound like that. No, you'd be going, no, let's make it sound like Blue Eyed Lady. Let's make it sound like, as you say, Heavy Traffic, or I can't remember anymore. Songs like that. That they've got that going on. In a way that they perhaps didn't have for that. A little brief, what's relatively a brief period now in the sort of late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, I would agree with you. So, Hello, the album, is there like a track on it that you gravitate to more than the others? That's a really hard thing, because as an album, it's just a solid, isn't it?
Yeah. It's probably Caroline, to be honest. I mean, that's my all-time favourite Quo song. It's the first one I heard, and when I was a kid, I actually had a cassette, and I just recorded different versions of Caroline, all the way down one side and all the way down the other side. I didn't have to keep rewinding and finding them on my Walkman and stuff. So I guess Caroline, but from a guitar point of view, from a player's point of view, I really enjoy Blue Eyed Lady and Softer Ride, I think. There is something about Rossi's solo in Softer Ride. It's the last one. It's just like the way it builds out of nowhere. It's like a pot boiling over. Yes, just great. And it's so very Francis Rossi, because I can't think of another guitarist that would start solo like that with that little meandering bit, and then by the end of the it's just wonderful. It's such fun to play, and I've obviously spent a long time unpicking all those notes and working out the patterns and the shapes, and how he might have attacked the string and all that kind of stuff, and trying to get the amp to sound as close as I could to his. And I think if I was to distill what I know about Quo and playing Quo, it probably has come from those three tracks, I think.
Well, Softer Ride is one of those live favourites where even if you don't know it, you can't help but bob your head to it.
Yeah.
The bit at the beginning, the ding ding, it's like, wow, what is that? You know, that doesn't really sound like any other Quo track.
Yeah.
And when I was first learning to play guitar, that was like the most fun thing ever, because it's literally like 2 or 3 notes, isn't it? Just a couple of strings just kind of strumming, and then a little bit of slide, almost like hammer-on type stuff that you got with things like Tune to the Music. And again, that multi-part multi-part melody that you have between all the instruments. It's easy to see why it's a favorite live, and I can see why you picked those 3 tracks. You say that you're injured at the moment. You don't have to tell me the story of how that came to happen, but when do you think you'll be back playing in any band?
I'm hopeful. I've got a gig on the 1st of July with Frog on a Rocket, and I've got to make that one. It's a private party. I love playing. I mean, not being able to play at the moment is driving me absolutely mad. I can just about get my shoulder around a Telecaster. It's easier with a strap. It's just the shape of the body. So I think a couple of weeks, but to be honest, it's going to be a bit of a recovery. I think it's just the effort that goes into playing Quo. I've had to have surgery on my shoulder, repetitive cord injury, I think, or something like that. Somebody said. So yeah, it won't be long. I'm not out for long at the moment. Woody's standing in for me in the Rossi role. I think we've got one or two gigs, and I think he's brought one of the guys from Quo Experience in to backfill him. So, anybody coming out to see Quo'd is still going to get a damn good time, because young Woody knows what he's doing. Chris and Steve are obviously still really 100% committed to it. But I'm back with Quo'd for the Wheelie Festival show. That's sometime in August. I think it's over the August bank holiday. And then I think we got some bookings in theatres elsewhere. I think we're going to Wales at some point. So yeah, we got a few bits and bobs for the back end of the year, and then into 24. I think that'd be the year we get a bit busier, I think.
Yeah, well, I hope you get better soon anyway, because I can imagine it's quite difficult. I mean, you've got, for our listeners, he's got 4 guitars behind there. Are they all yours?
Yes, they are, yeah. In fact, on the wall, the white one is a 1962 Burns, and that was the one that is Genesis for me. It belonged to my uncle. And I found it under a bed at my nan and granddad's house. This is on the other side, and I dragged it out. I went, as you open it, you go, oh, there it is. You've seen it. It's one of those sort of Spinal Tap moments. Enough of that, put it away. And anyway, I eventually sort of plucked up the courage to ask, can I borrow Uncle Bob's guitar? And I played guitar, from an early age. That's the first electric I had. And so actually that's the instrument that I sat picking the notes out. Eventually, so that has seen a fair bit of Quo. But I would have been about 12 or 13, I suppose, and then that had to go back, and then I bought the blue Strat. That's probably the one I'd run into a burning building. The blue Strat then got retired for the telly, the green telly next to it. That one's been signed now by Rossi, Parfitt, John, Jackie, and Jeff. Yeah. I really should have got at the convention Leon to sign it, because he was there. Obviously, it's a shame I didn't get to the convention when Alan was with us, because that would have made it perfect. So. It does come out on stage a little bit, and of course, then next to that is Ivy, which is my number one. So it was built for me by Mike Smith. It's not a full-on replica. It hasn't got the hole in it, and all that. It's not got the daft bridge that Francis has got, but it was kind of built to be, well, what if Fender did make a green Telecaster in 65 or whatever his guitar is, and it's got some other customizations on it that. For me, make it pretty much the perfect telly. So it's on stage with me at every Quo gig. With Frog on a Rocket, it's on there. It's seen a bit of action in an ABBA tribute that I'm part of, and it's also done some nice sort of blues jazz gigs in the Eva Cassidy thing that I do. So it's a wonderfully versatile instrument. But when people see it, they go, "Oh, you're too old in it. It's not very good Rossi replica." I just go,
You just say it's not got a hole in it, so it's not.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a Rossi replica. It's it's the lost guitar. It's Rossi's lost guitar.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming back again, Gary. I mean, we must. I know that we spoke at the convention and you were on the convention podcast, but we must make it much sooner than 4 years
Definitely.
next time.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, hopefully I'll get up to. I wouldn't mind going up and seeing a few of the other bands. I was going to try and get up to the McVention, but I'm not sure that's gonna happen now with other commitments I've got for for other live work. But yeah, it would be great to catch up again and have a beer and a natter and talk all things Quo and see some bands. That would be brilliant.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Gary, for appearing on the podcast today.
Okay, it's lovely to talk to you, and hi to all your listeners. Hope you enjoyed it.